I'm your host, Stephen Tedjamulia, and today we have a special guest with us, James Smith, the CTO of CarTechIQ. James, it's been awesome to be able to talk to him, very knowledgeable in the space of cloud, CTO, and he's been an esteemed member of the community. And James, we welcome you to the show today.
Thanks for having me, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
And you're welcome. And before we get started, CarTechIQ seems like such an awesome company to work for. Can you give us a little bit on CarTech, and then a little bit background on you? How'd you? What's been your path, CEO, a cloud and AI architect? Give us a little background there on the company and your started
Sure,
with
sure.
podcast.
And I'll try to keep it short because those are the two subjects that I love talking about. CarTech IQ, I'm one of the founding members of CarTech IQ. I'm the technology side of that. But it all started from us seeing that the automotive industry is closed. The all the data is just held within companies, and we feel that the automotive industry is just ripe to just let that data out there so that we can build some amazing applications. And that's where CarTech IQ really came about. So we're using AI as the means to be able to get to that data without releasing, not really get to the data. That sounded like we're reaching in and grabbing the data. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're giving people access to data that they didn't have before. Like, for example, uh, if you fixed your car in one location and you drove it across country and then you had to take your car to get it repaired there for whatever reason, that shop would then be able to see all of the work that you've done before. And the idea of having this AI, which we call Mechanic IQ, there overseeing the whole thing gives the mechanic the ability to more accurately fix that car because the AI knows everything about that car, everything that has happened. So we're really enabling the mechanics to be more efficient. So CarTech IQ is just amazing. I formed it with a bunch of great friends, a bunch of people that have been in the industry for a while that feel the same way as us. And we're really disrupting. I know that's not the word that you want to use nowadays, but we are disrupting the industry because people just want to jump into AI, but the automotive industry is slow to adopt new technologies. But we're hoping to change that. And then you asked,
Oh, if the mechanic's doing the right thing, that would be awesome. It'd be like, oh,
I
do I really need to do this right
I
now
can't divulge anything, but
or later?
that's a good idea.
Yeah, people before that $1,500 transmission is change. I'm like, let me ask this app.
Yes,
So we need
you
to.
DIYers, we do have a DIY version of it coming soon. You can get a glimpse of it right now through ChatGPT. Created a GPT in OpenAI's platform that talks to ours, and you can get a little bit of a glimpse of what's coming there. So anybody who wants to try
Okay,
it out, it's Mechanic GPT. That's what it's called.
okay, love it. You're taking a lot of legacy systems, right? And trying to tie them together to the cloud, implementing
Yes.
AI, and just by that, lets people know, hey, I'm doing it. I've done it. I got the T-shirt,
Yeah.
right? I'm more than happy to help.
Yeah,
But yeah, give us a little background on
we're really
you.
breaking down the wall. That's what we're doing. We're really breaking that down that the vehicle owners have access to what. Wouldn't you believe it? Wouldn't you want to know everything? If you went to buy a used car, wouldn't you want to know everything there was to know about that car? What?
Oh yeah, and not only that car, I'd love to know that model of car for that year, aware of, right? That have happened to other kids in the
Right.
past, or yeah, there is nothing out there like that. That's like pretty innovative. I'm the editor in chief of a auto growth magazine, and this is, but that's great. Yeah, tell us a bit about yourself, though. I don't want to divulge too much from the
hmm
topic at hand. This place, this position, this groundbreaking innovative
A long
experience.
road, but I guess for me, I've always been a tinkerer. I've always taken things apart. I've always And when I came to the U.S., originally, I went into the Navy, and the Navy really brought that out in me. And I started to be put in situations where I was looking at the big picture. And that just continued on through my career. And once I fell in love with software engineering, because I was in micro miniature repair when I was in the Navy. When I came out of the Navy and got into software, I just really gravitated to the big picture. And that's when I started to learn. So I'm a self-taught. I did not go to the university for this, done this all on my own with a lot of help, but I've done this on my own. And I just have always gravitated to the big picture. And architecture was really where I blossomed, if you will. Back in the day, and I'm dating myself, but when Microsoft had the Microsoft Systems Engineer certification, that was where I really fell in love with architecture. Because as a systems engineer,
Yeah.
you have to see the big picture and then getting down into the software. And just over the years, I've gone into various different industries from biotech to e-commerce to nonprofit organizations, and always with the idea of global scales. Just almost, it seemed like every job that I went into, it just went into a bigger scale to the point now where the last few companies that I've worked at, and now with CarTechIQ, we're really talking global scale. We're really talking about data being accessed or being generated or being distributed globally. And I've really enjoyed the challenges that come along with that.
No, you prepared yourself well for where you are today, and we're very grateful that you're on the show, being able to give us some advice and tips. So let's
Sure.
dive in. Right? Setting up an infrastructure to capitalize AI advancements, like it's where we need to be, where we need to be in today's landscape. What are some key considerations engineering managers should keep in mind when embarking on this journey of getting their infrastructure ready to take advantage of AI?
The key really is that everybody's telling you that their way is the best way. And really, the reality is that your way is the best way, but you have to educate yourself. AI, unlike the past, is one, very fluid, and it's causing so many people to jump in, and so many people, so many different technologies to want to move really fast, that it's drowning out and causing people to almost freak out. So as an engineering manager, you got to really take a step back and look at what you're trying to accomplish, what you want to do, and really focus on your strengths. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, and it it really tails into my next question, which is, in your case, how do you assess your organizational's existing infrastructure and strengths to determine its readiness for AI integration, right? So it's, you mentioned, well, let me evaluate where our strengths are in place. What do I need to do to get ready for AI?
Yeah, and that's a big question. So because of the fact that AI is non-deterministic, I think it also depends on what AI you're talking about too. So let me take a step back. First, to be able to more accurately answer that question, we got to understand that AI is really a broad term. AI can
Yeah.
be anything from being able to do fraud detection, to do visual detection of objects, to a large language model. What we're generally talking about, sorry about that, been, let me put my computer here on focus. Yeah, since it has been around for a while, we've already been able to implement things like vision detection. We've already been able to implement those types of things. So that what is really becoming big in the industry is the use of large language models. So for the listener, in the following questions, if we can look at the answers wrapped around large language model, because that's really where the industry is going. That's really what the industry is trying to figure out how to use. We already know that we can implement vision detection. We already know that we can implement all those things. Applications are already doing it, have been doing it. But how do we implement large language models? The infrastructure needs to be flexible enough to, and the organization needs to be flexible enough to deal with the non-deterministic nature of it. So if you are going to ask the AI, whether you're using Palm or Llama or ChatGPT, or you're creating your own large language model, which you have to know that every time you ask it a question, it's going to be different. Yes, generally it's going to give you the same information, but it's going to be different. That's the point of the non-deterministic. So how does your infrastructure deal with that? That is something that we have never in the industry had in infrastructure. It's always been A plus B equals C, and you always know that A plus B equals C. Now it's A plus B equals a different form of C. It might be a different font, or you know what I'm trying to say. It's not always the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just generally the same thing. So your infrastructure needs to be flexible enough to handle that. And it also depends on how you're gonna use it. So we can talk about the way to use an LLM within an installable monolith application, but that's not really where the industry is going, right? We're talking, you're talking to me, which I'm cloud, global scale. So couching the answers around that, the infrastructure is going to be more flexible, scalable, and robust in the form that a cloud infrastructure is more scalable, flexible, and robust. Is that?
It, yeah, and I'm gonna dive into a little bit here because we're focusing on large language models.
Mhm.
And as you're assessing your infrastructure, using a monolithic non-cloud platform, and you want to take advantage of large language models, uh, and you're assessing your infrastructure, what are some of the key things that you need to keep in mind that you've seen or that you recommend
Mhm.
people look at if they're trying to take advantage, but they're stuck in a little outdated system and infrastructure, but they want to leverage it? What recommendations do you have for
In that
them?
case, in a situation where you want to keep your monolith, which is fine, right? It's all up to you. Although the industry has shown that a microservice architecture or non-monolithic can be much more effective. But if you want to keep it, API is king in that situation. Don't build it into your application. Don't build it as part of that monolith, but build it as a separate service. Call it through an API. Get used to using that API, because what happens is the AI will be changing a lot faster than the monolithic application. So you don't want to couple them in that way. You want to make sure that you keep that flexibility. So if there's one suggestion that I can make to people that want to stay in a monolith situation, is use APIs. Use APIs with AI, specifically large language models. Do not build them into it, because you're gonna run into versioning problems like you wouldn't believe.
That's great advice. Any other challenges organizations face when setting up this architecture to take advantage of large language models, and how can they overcome it? The API, building that, but are there any other ones you've seen or you can see that you want to
Yes,
warn people about?
yes. Specifically, implementing large language models is, I said earlier that with a monolith implementing LLM, that API is king. Now, the answer to your question is data is king. Many people think that implementing an LLM is just implementing another module. Now, Of course, if you're going to use just an LLM, like if you're going to use just OpenAI, or if you're going to use Meta, or well, I don't think Genesis has an API yet. I don't remember. If you're going to use them, you're not going to have any problems. However, if you're going to contextualize the LLM to your own data, or if you're going to retrain one of those LLMs to your own data, in that case, data is king. And the focus at that point should switch from the infrastructure for your application to the infrastructure for your data. Because if you cannot move that data, or if you cannot train that data or use the LLM to retrain that data, you're going to run into problems time and time again. I've beat my head on that wall many times, and I'm telling you, you want to focus on the infrastructure for the data. And the unfortunate thing is that whether you're creating that infrastructure in-house or you're creating it in the cloud, it gets expensive. And the expenses change. The expense from creating, say, for example, you're creating a function within Azure to do a specific thing to get a work order. That has a certain cost, and you can predict that cost all the time. When it comes to data, you don't really get charged. You get charged minimally. And this is the same thing for AWS, by the way, with Lambdas and the data. So I just happen to pick Azure. You get charged minimally for storing it. The moment you get charged is when you start moving that data around. So if you're not aware of where those things, where those charges are, that cost can start going through the roof. So it's very important to understand how you're going to move that data, to understand where you're going with the data and what you're going to do with it, to then set up your infrastructure for that.
And let's talk about scalability a little bit and then
Sure.
optimization. What role does scalability have? You talked about the data, you talked about apps, APIs, scalability play in designing this infrastructure to support large language models with your applications. Ensure scalability from the onset.
Let's go back to the basis of the answer. So the answer to that question is very different whether you're going to keep a monolith or whether you're going to go to the cloud. A monolith scales very differently. You have to scale it up rather than scaling it out. A cloud-based microservice or even an in-house based microservice architecture, you can scale it out instead of scaling it up. I hope that your listeners know the difference between that. So it's basically giving it more memory, more CPUs versus more instances of it. In the cloud, you want more instances of it. Generally, they come out to about the same price, but scaling out usually comes a lot cheaper. And so scalability, it's crucial to design it into it if you're really going to. I feel like I keep coming back to cost, but I'm guessing now that I'm listening to myself talking, that cost is a big driving factor for this.
That's my next question is all on cost. Keep going.
Cost does seem to be a big driving factor because I tell you, I've been in companies where they don't open up the books and say, okay, this is how much budget, and I design it in one way, but then come to find out that I had a very limited budget. Like, okay, now I have to go back and redesign the whole thing. So it's really important to know the cost because it can affect your infrastructure. But if you're in an amazing situation where you don't have to worry about the cost, then scaling out is the way to go. And so I think if I go back to your question, what role does scalability play? I think it's an amazing, probably one of the highest factors in creating that infrastructure because you especially if you're going to go global, right, you want to make sure that your scale capability can reach around the world because you're not going to scale worldwide if you're just going to stay in one data center. Your
Yeah.
infrastructure has to be able to come up in West US and come up in East Europe, because otherwise you're going to have that lag. So you got to really, it does play a big role.
And that may be having to redesign the monolithic app to be able
Right.
to maybe move it to the cloud at
Right.
that point, right? Um, now, a question that came up for me: what is a cheaper way to do it?
What is the cheaper way to do it?
Yeah, you talked about scaling globally
Hmm.
and probably having to do the monolithic application to the cloud, but what are my other options?
Okay, so if cost, there are quite a few options out there. There are quite a few patterns, but let me just be blunt and frank. Microservice architectures are the cheapest to implement. And specifically, and I'll challenge people to start conversations on it because I don't think enough conversations take place around this topic. In my experience, the cheapest approach is going serverless rather than Kubernetes when it comes to microservice architecture. You have to think that you have to consider that Kubernetes and any of the container orchestration platforms like Service Mesh, for example, they require VMs. Bottom line, they require VMs. VMs cost more. So if you can write your microservice architecture to be housed in a Lambda or in an Azure function, which is the way that we've CarTechIQ, it is significantly cheaper. I can't stress it enough. I have done both and I have seen the difference. Yes, there are some ups and downs. Every architecture has some ups and downs. The the downside to microservice architecture is management. It's you have to have a very well organized tagging structure and a very well organized way of managing the communication between the systems. But at the end of the day, to answer your question, serverless microservice architecture. That's what I'll put out there. There you go.
There we go. Now we're running out of time here, and I have tons of questions, but we're not going to be able to get to them. If you had to summarize in our conversation so far, as companies want to transition to take advantage of LLMs, we've talked about scalability, we've talked about monolithic systems, we've talked about the cloud, we've talked about optimization. Um, Summarize the major points we just discussed from your view as the advice you'd provide these engineering managers as they're contemplating what do I need to do to move to the cloud? Not to move to the cloud, but to take advantage of LLMs. If I have a monolithic system, what should I consider? What should best practices?
Right. If I'm talking to an engineering manager asking me that question, my very first question would be, you need to first consider, why are you moving to an AI? And we haven't talked about that, but I think it's an important question to ask, because many companies, and I've been in that situation too, where upper management comes and says, we have to do X, but they don't know what that means. From the engineering
Right.
manager perspective, we know the implication of that. So what I would recommend to that engineering manager is, think, when they're coming to you and saying we have to implement an LLM, think about it a slightly different way. Think, is it more effective to use a rules engine? What upper management, or what the project managers, or I'm sorry, not project managers, but product managers are trying to accomplish, is it easier, is it better, more effective to use a rules engine? If in answering that question, you determine that no, it's better to use an LLM, now you've made the first step into moving into an LLM, into an AI infrastructure. At that point, then you know what you have to do. You have the basis of what you have to do. So to summarize the whole thing, if on a in a monolith situation, Focus on APIs. Don't include it into your monolith because you're going to get yourself stuck. And if you want to move into the cloud, it's good to move into the cloud. There are a plethora of different options to move into the cloud. You can do a shift and lift, or lift and shift, sorry. You can do a lift and adjust, and you can just completely migrate. But if you're going to stay, use the APIs. Now, if you're going to create a new infrastructure in the cloud, then your primary focus should be first on data, on your data infrastructure, and secondly, on the API infrastructure. Thirdly, the mechanism of communicating that data. Because remember that when you move the data, that's when the cost increases.
That is great. And I have one more question to ask you for a long time to give it. Now, how would you effectively communicate the importance of investing in infrastructure to AI stakeholders as you've outlined to them? They want to do it, great, but now we got to invest, and this is the way for scalability and all the other reasons you listed. How would you recommend this discussion?
Repeat repeat that question because I
Yeah.
as you're asking
How
the
can
question, I just had so many different things pop into my head.
no, how can engineering managers effectively communicate the importance of investing in infrastructure for AI to
Okay,
stakeholders within the
okay,
organization?
I got it. Okay,
Because it's going to cost money, and it could cost a lot of money. So they want to make this move, and now I got to tell them how much it's going to cost
right.
and why they should invest in it versus trying to go the cheapest path.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it comes down to the point that I made earlier. Does a rule engine make you more effective? Does a rule engine do what you need it to do? And if the answer is no, then yes, that gives you that starting point to be able to communicate. Upper management tends to look at implementing AI as a series of records. They still, and don't get me wrong, there could be upper management out there that understands it. I guess I keep talking about upper management as those guys, but I guess I'm there too. I just don't consider myself upper management. So there are some of us that understand it, but the majority of the time they do not understand it. The best way is to help them to understand that data begets AI begets app. So they tend to think of it the other way around because they've been used to you create an application that creates data and then you make money. But
Yeah.
AI is the other way around. You have data that creates an API that you use in an app. So helping them to see that the infrastructure focused on data is getting past that is going to be crucial. And that's why it's really very important to have upper management buy-in or the org buy-in, not just upper management. The product managers, they need to be aware of that too, because their influence is big on how upper management or how the organization sees it.
This is great. It's been a great session. I wish we could go longer, but you've given such a great you framed it as an architect, as a CTO. You've been able to break out the logic. If anybody else wants more detail specific to their organization, to their systems, feel free to reach out to James Smith and the engineering manager community
Mm-hmm.
on LinkedIn. And it's been a privilege to have you on the show today, James. The space, backwards, forwards, you've done it through the way you've logically thought through things, and you're a true architect in many ways that has done this patient many times before. Thanks for time. very much.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for listening, and for the ones that will be listening, and we appreciate that. So we're going to say goodbye to the audience until next time.